Hey Patreon viewers, so what you're getting here is a little bit of a preview video of my review of the Dynasty Forge Mainz Gladius. So I've already shown this on screen, as you guys know, and I felt, because it's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, I felt that I needed to get hold of another Gladius. I've held a few replicas over the years. I've never owned one, although as I've mentioned before, I do have a blade for one that Paul Binns made, but I've never had it hilted up. But you know, I'm not a massive expert on Roman era weapons, although I probably know more than an average person, but I don't regard myself as an expert on those. And so I really wanted to have a better frame of reference to make a fair review of this, and also bearing in mind that people who are looking for reviews for this are also going to be looking for other makes that are available of Gladius, for example Albion, Windlass for example, and things like this. So I obtained from my friend Gavin, who incidentally is the guy wearing the Lorica segmentata in the video I've just published on the public channel, this Gladius, which is the Mainz Gladius from, it's either the Fulham or the Mainz, I can't remember now, but anyway, it's an Albion Gladius. And it did confirm some of my initial impressions and feelings about the Dynasty Forge one. The principal one being that the Dynasty Forge Gladius, the grip is too long, in my opinion. As you can see, the proportions are quite different of each hilt, and I think that's a bit of a problem, because I think that Dynasty Forge are maybe to a certain extent pandering towards what they think a modern buyer will want, rather than necessarily reproducing something that's a bit more historically accurate. Before I compare these in terms of size and proportion, I'll just talk about the construction method as well. I'm going to dispense with the scabbards, because I'm not going to compare the scabbards at all, because this is a person's own recreated scabbard. It doesn't come with the Albion. Albions don't come with scabbards, unfortunately. So I'll dispense with the scabbards because I can't compare those. So first of all, here's the Dynasty Forge sword, and here is the Albion. Now you will notice there are some differences of proportions of the blade. Okay, the Albion is broader and a tiny bit shorter, and just the way that where the tapers are and that kind of stuff are slightly different. That doesn't bother me at all, and that wouldn't take part in any kind of comparison in terms of a review, because they're just simply different Gladiuses. Okay, and we do find historical examples of Gladii which are discovered archaeologically in museums. You can go and look at them. Do vary. They vary in terms of length, breadth, where the taper is, the shapes of the blades, and this is why we've got the so-called Mainz, Fulham, Pompeii, the various types of Gladius, and those are just sort of generic, general groupings. In fact, there's a lot of variation, and it does seem that even at any one time you could find different types of Gladius across the empire in different regions. So you do get different formats. Although these are fundamentally related types, they are slightly differently proportioned. Now what I can talk about, however, is the characteristics of these as blades. The first thing that you notice when you pick each up is that the Dynasty Forge one is much heftier. Okay, the Albion has more distal taper, and it's just generally a slightly slimmer blade. So the Dynasty Forge one is a heftier blade. Now that in itself isn't necessarily a problem, but I do get the feeling with the Dynasty Forge blade that it's a bit heavier than it needs to be for the size, whereas the Albion feels nimble and quick. Bearing in mind this is being used with a scutum, and you want it to be a quick, mostly thrusting and sometimes slashing implement. The Dynasty Forge sword doesn't particularly feel nimble at all, and feels not even particularly like a sword that you're going to use with a large shield. It feels like a sword that you might use by itself. So the Albion feels a bit more how I think a Gladius should feel, but I have to caveat that with the fact that, you know, Gladius is Gladii varied a lot throughout the periods and across areas as well. Even from workshop to workshop they would have varied. In terms of the hilts, so Albion have actually gone for a very simple hilt. Now when you consider the price of Albions, and they are in my view excessively expensive for what you can get as good as an Albion from a Czech or Polish maker. They are excessively expensive, and I think for the price, I think they've done a very, very simple hilt. They could have done something a little bit more elaborate, a little bit more detailed. You do get a more detailed hilt with the Dynasty Forge, but it's got this gloss varnish and it has a slightly more machined look. In my view, the Albion looks more like a historical thing. And let's talk about the construction method as well. So this has a threaded tang, and the whole pommel is split into two halves, and the top half screws and you screw it all together. The Albion is constructed historically and is peened at the end. So to sum up, without doing a full review, but I will be doing a full review of this sword and I will use this one for reference as well. Generally speaking, I think the Dynasty Forge sword has a lot of potential, but it needs a few things changing about it. The hilt needs shortening, perhaps the shape of the hilt needs changing a little bit, and the blade needs lightening up a little bit. So it's a very good product, but not as good as the Albion. Then again, it's cheaper than the Albion. So the bit of this video that is for you patrons only is to say that this puts me in a somewhat difficult position, because Dynasty Forge are a very nice company, I like them a lot, but of the swords that they have sent me, I feel that the Gladius here, the Mainz Gladius, is the one that requires the most changing. And I have to be honest in my reviews, so there we go. I have to be honest and say what is good about this and what is bad about this and how it can be made better. So a sort of behind the scenes, or a look inside my preparation for future videos, which you will see on the channel, a look inside my mind and see, well, okay, how do I constructively criticise this Gladius? I still quite like it, but it's not as nice as the Albion, it has to be said. And I think that based on what they've done here, they could, if they get it right, they could make something that's nicer than the Albion. Anyway, I hope that's an interesting view behind the scenes, as it were, for preparation for a video which I'm probably going to shoot very, very soon, maybe even later today. And thanks again for watching the extra videos here on Patreon, and I'll see you guys soon. Cheers, folks.